Hello and welcome to Courage to Overcome. On this podcast, I'll be talking about emotionally destructive relationships from a Christian biblical perspective with a bit of psychology. I also post inspirational and motivational content. So if you're interested in that, please subscribe to my channel. Today, I want to talk about whether the church allows narcissism to flourish. So I watched this documentary about a woman who had been abused by her husband. She didn't realize it was abuse initially until she met with a counselor. Her husband was a minister of the gospel, a Christian from a good Christian family foundation. She recalls when they were first dating how she saw the red flags of the relationship and she wanted to back out, but was convinced by her mother, who was impressed by the social status of the boyfriend's family, to continue with the relationship. Several times she observed his toxic behaviour but was convinced that she should continue. Sometimes, a lot of the times actually, God will warn you that what you're getting into is a mistake. So it's up to you to receive or ignore the warning signs. However, this lady ignored the warning signs and went ahead and married this person, only discovering her mistake shortly afterwards. The husband became very abusive. She went to her church for counselling. They advised joint counselling for both of them. Of course, her husband lied about what was going on, minimized the whole wife's experience, said she was extremely sensitive, was not submissive, and he just charmed his way around the counselors and convinced them that she was the problem and not him. In conclusion, the church counselor admonished her for not being understanding and submissive and handed her a booklet on the duties of the wife and how to be a good wife. Heard that story before? Here is another one. Growing up with an abusive father, Julie was determined to create a better marriage for herself. But as any psychologist would tell you, we tend to reproduce what we experience in childhood. Her own husband became alcoholic and violent. He would punch walls, he threw things at her, he would yank her off the chair and drag her by her hair along the floor in front of her children. So Julie sought help from the pastor and elders at the church, but repeatedly she was told that the abuse was her fault. Oh, if you forgive more, if you love more, if you submit more, if you die to self more, he will blossom into the man you want him to be. Julie's husband escalated his bullying behaviour until one day he punched her in the face in front of their children. Even then, the pastor and elders treated her as the person at fault. They said, he should not have hit you. But what did you do to provoke him? The elders refused to discipline Julie's husband for his physical violence. Finally, Julie's case was forwarded to the local presbytery, the administrative body of several Presbyterian churches, which ruled in her favour and affirmed that her physical abuse was grounds for divorce. So I had a conversation with a pastor friend of mine. This was after my divorce, shortly after my divorce. Initially, I was skeptical about sharing my experiences about my ex-husband. I didn't think he would understand, because if you haven't had any experiences with narcissism, it's really difficult to explain to people, because most people don't get it. But thank goodness when I was explaining, he understood, because he had one of his church members complain about the same thing. So he told me that he had been in a number of counselling sessions with this couple who were church members, and the wife was complaining about the husband's behaviour towards her. And she said it had been going on for years, and she was emotionally affected by it. It was having a detrimental effect on her health and well-being. It had been going on for years and she was desperate for a change. She was basically fed up and couldn't take it anymore. The husband responded by saying that the wife was exaggerating and this was not the case. The pastor was inclined to believe the husband because he had not witnessed or had any inclination to disbelieve the husband. From his experience, that is the pastor's experience, this is what he was telling me. The guy had always been charming and well behaved in the church, and the pastor thought that she needed to be more patient, submissive, and loving. Can you see the trail here? You need to be patient, you need to be submissive, you need to be loving. It was only when the wife, in a separate counselling session with the pastor, that the wife played the pastor a recording, because she recorded her husband during his fits of rage. And she played it to the pastor, and the pastor could hear his language, the husband's language towards her. Apparently he was swearing and calling her names, and that so when he heard this, he couldn't believe it. The pastor himself, he couldn't believe it, because he had never, his experience with the husband was, he's a charming man, he's a caring man, he's a kind man, not a word out of place. But when he heard all this, he realized that the husband had been lying. And the thing that, I think, the thing that he said, the pastor said that the thing that caused him to be deceived was that he had known him for a really, really long time, and he had never displayed any such behavior towards his wife or anybody else in the church, which that's covert narcissism. That's covert narcissism, exactly. Being kind and caring on the outside, but when you're in the house, you're a devil. That's covert. No one in the church had complained about him at all. And this pastor is very discerning. He is a very discerning pastor, but he was actually deceived by this narcissist, and it happens all the time. And I told this pastor that, his behavior was covert and undercover, and that's what happens. That's why people don't actually believe victims of abuse, because they don't see it. So he was on his best behavior when in church, surrounded by church members, but when he got home, he behaved like a real jerk to his wife. So, for a wife who is married to a covert narcissist, it's really very difficult to explain to your pastor, especially if the husband is present in a counseling session, that your husband is abusive and it is continuous, especially if he denies it and the pastor has never heard or seen him or received any reports from others about his bad behavior. And normally it's probably someone who is very discerning person, or actually maybe God reveals to the pastor what is going on. It's very difficult to understand and truly believe what is truly going on. And all these that I've mentioned, they're not just stories, they are genuine personal experiences. And I know I've been mentioning women a lot. These are the examples that I've come across, but this does happen to men also. Men also are victims of this kind of abuse. When a spouse constantly engages in abusive behavior, how can leaders in the church hold the abusive spouse accountable? And how can they counsel the victim effectively? Well, one thing for sure is there should not be joint counselling. That's one thing for sure. That's the first thing for sure. For example, I read about a marriage therapist that persuaded a woman to reveal that her husband was being violent at home. So in the therapist's office, they were both together at this session. And the husband, when he heard what the wife had said, or when the wife reported about what was going on in the home, he appeared shaken and contrite and repentant. But on the drive home, he kept one hand on the steering wheel, while with the other hand, he grabbed the wife's hair and slammed her head into the dashboard repeatedly, screaming, "I told you never to talk to anyone about that," except that he used much more vulgar language. Joint therapy can pose considerable risks to the victim, male or female. Well, it's very typical especially in churches, for women to be advised to be loving, submissive, and forgiving, because that's what the Bible says, and that's true. That's what we should do. That is something that we need to do. But that is not the answer to preventing abuse. Unfortunately, it doesn't just disappear if you're loving, submissive, and forgiving. Narcissists view this in a different way. They see this as a sign of weakness and acceptance to continue and intensify their toxic behavior. Narcissists view submission as weakness and forgiveness as acceptance of their destructive behavior. So does the church allow abuse? While not intentionally, I believe that there is a lack of understanding about narcissists and how to deal with them. And because of this lack of understanding or lack of knowledge, the perpetrator is not held accountable for his behavior, and the victim of the abuse is not fully supported. The Bible does say, after all, my people perish for lack of knowledge. So what can pastors, church leaders, counselors do in order to support their congregants, both perpetrators and victims? Well, hopefully I will address this in another episode of this podcast. I hope you enjoyed this episode. Please like if you enjoyed it, and please subscribe to my channel, and I hope to meet with you again in another episode. Take care. Bye.